You know, folks, when I first started in this business back in 1987, I was fresh out of Wharton with my MBA, had my economics degree from Harvard burning a hole in my pocket. I thought I knew everything about investing. I thought I understood the markets, understood risk, understood what drives people to make the decisions they make with their money. But let me tell you something. After 37 years in this industry, after managing billions in retirement assets, after sitting across the table from thousands upon thousands of retirees and pre-retirees, I'm still shocked. I'm still absolutely shocked by what I see happening out there. And what shocks me the most? What keeps me up at night thinking about the people I've met, the stories I've heard? It's this one purchase, this one seemingly innocent purchase that's absolutely devastating retirement accounts across America. And you know what the crazy part is? The crazy part is that financial advisors, retirement planners, even some of my colleagues who should know better, they're not talking about this enough. They're not warning people about this financial landmine that's sitting right there in plain sight. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, he's going to talk about cars, right? He's going to tell us not to buy that luxury car in retirement. Or maybe you think I'm going to talk about boats or vacation homes or those timeshares that nobody should ever buy anyway. But no, this is something different. This is something that catches people off guard because it seems so reasonable, so necessary even. I'm talking about long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, wait a minute, this guy's lost his mind. Long-term care insurance is supposed to protect your retirement savings, not drain them. And you're right to think that way, because that's exactly what the insurance companies want you to think. That's exactly what they're selling you on. But here's the thing, and this is where my shock comes in. This is where 37 years of experience has taught me something that goes against conventional wisdom. The way most people approach long-term care insurance, the way it's being sold to them, the way they're implementing it in their retirement. Planning. It's not protecting their nest egg, it's draining it. It's draining it slowly, methodically, and completely. Let me tell you about Margaret Thompson from Scottsdale, Arizona. Beautiful woman, 72 years old when I met her 3 years ago. Her husband had passed away 2 years prior, left her with a nice nest egg, about $1.2 million in various retirement accounts, paid off house worth about $600,000, Social Security coming in. She was in good shape, you know. She was in really good shape financially. But Margaret was terrified, absolutely terrified of the cost of long-term care. And you know what? She had every right to be. Her mother had been in a nursing home for 4 years before she passed, and Margaret watched that care cost eat away at her parents' savings month after month after month. So when her financial advisor, and I won't mention names here, but this is a guy at one of the big wirehouses, guy who should have known better, when this advisor recommended she purchase a long-term care insurance policy with a $300,000 benefit, Margaret thought she was being smart. She thought she was being responsible. The premium? $8,400 a year. Now that doesn't sound too bad, right? I mean, $8,400 a year to protect against potentially hundreds of thousands in long-term care costs? Sounds reasonable. Sounds like good planning. But here's what nobody told Margaret. Here's what that advisor either didn't know or didn't bother to explain. That premium wasn't fixed. Oh, no. That premium was going to increase. And not just by a little bit. We're talking about increases of 15%, 20%, sometimes 30% or more year over year. By the time I met Margaret 3 years later, that $8,400 annual premium had ballooned to $14,600, and she'd received notices. She'd received notices that it was going up again to $18,900 the following year. And you know what the insurance company told her when she called to complain? They told her she could reduce her benefits to keep the premium lower, or she could drop the policy entirely and lose everything she'd already paid in. Think about that for a second. Think about the math here. In just 5 years, Margaret had paid over $60,000 in premiums. $60,000. And for what? For a policy that was pricing itself out of her budget. For a policy that might not even be there when she needed it most. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of that $60,000. If Margaret had simply put that money into a conservative investment portfolio, let's say she earned just 4% annually, which is very conservative, That $60,000 would have been worth over $73,000, and that's just the beginning because she would have kept contributing to that fund year after year instead of throwing good money after bad on insurance premiums. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, but what if she needs care? What if she needs $200,000 or $300,000 worth of care? Wouldn't the insurance have been worth it then? And that's a fair question. That's a very fair question. But here's what the insurance companies don't want you to know. Here's what they bury in the fine print. The average length of stay in a nursing home is 2.4 years. 2.4 years. And the average person who needs long-term care? They need it for about 3 years total, including in-home care, assisted living, all of it. So we're not talking about decades of care for most people. We're talking about a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years at most. And here's the other thing they don't tell you. Here's the other dirty little secret of the long-term care insurance industry, the elimination period. Most policies have what they call an elimination period. That's the amount of time you have to pay for care out of your own pocket before the insurance kicks in. And that elimination period is usually 90 days, sometimes 180 days or more. So think about this. You're paying these massive premiums year after year after year. And when you finally need care, you still have to pay the first 3 to 6 months out of your own pocket anyway. At $8,000 to $12,000 a month for nursing home care, you're looking at $24,000 to $72,000 in out-of-pocket costs before your insurance even starts paying. I had another client. Let me call him Robert. Robert from Palm Beach. Robert paid premiums for 12 years. 12 years. Almost $90,000 in premiums. When he finally needed care, the insurance company found every excuse in the book to delay payments. They questioned his doctor's assessments, they required second opinions, they made him and his family jump through hoops for months while the bills kept piling up. And you know what happened? Robert's family ended up paying for most of his care out of pocket anyway, because fighting the insurance company was more expensive and time-consuming than just paying the bills themselves. Robert passed away before they ever collected more than about $30,000 from a policy he'd paid $90,000 into. But let me tell you the story that really, really drives this home for me. The story that made me completely rethink my position on long-term care insurance. This was about 6 years ago now. I was working with a couple. Let me call them John and Susan Miller. They were in their late 60s, approaching retirement. John had worked for IBM for 35 years. Susan was a school teacher. Solid middle-class folks, you know. They'd saved diligently. They had about $800,000 in retirement accounts. They owned their home free and clear. Now, John and Susan came to me because they were worried. They were worried about long-term care costs, just like Margaret was, just like so many of my clients are. And honestly, at that time, I was still recommending long-term care insurance in certain situations. I thought it made sense for people like John and Susan. So we looked at policies, we looked at several different options, and we found what seemed like a good policy, $250,000 benefit each, premiums of about $6,800 per year combined. Again, seemed reasonable for the protection it offered. But John was a numbers guy. Remember, he'd worked at IBM for 35 years, he understood spreadsheets and calculations, and John started running some numbers. He started modeling different scenarios. What if they put that $6,800 a year into investments instead? What if they just self-insured? And you know what John found? What he found was eye-opening. If they invested that $6,800 annually and earned just 5% per year, which is very achievable with a balanced portfolio, in 20 years, they'd have over $230,000. And that's just from the premiums they would have paid. That doesn't include any growth on their existing retirement savings. But here's the kicker. Here's what really sealed the deal for John. He started researching the actual statistics on long-term care. And what he found was that only about 70% of people over 65 will ever need any kind of long-term care at all. Only 70%. And of those who do need care, the average total cost is around $140,000 to $180,000. So John's thinking, and this is brilliant thinking, this is the kind of thinking more people need to do. John's thinking is, why am I paying insurance premiums for something I have a 30% chance of never needing, when I could just save that money myself and probably come out ahead either way? And you know what? John was right. Absolutely right. John and Susan are now 75 and 73, respectively. They've been investing that $6,800 annually for the past 9 years, and their self-insurance fund is worth over $80,000. Plus, they got the peace of mind knowing that money is theirs. It's liquid, it's growing, and they can use it for anything. Long-term care, travel, helping their grandchildren with college, whatever they want. Compare that to their neighbors, who bought similar long-term care insurance around the same time. Their neighbors have paid over $60,000 in premiums so far. They've received multiple premium increase notices, and they're not even sure their insurance company will still be around when they need it, because that's another thing nobody talks about: insurance company solvency. I've seen it happen, folks. I've seen insurance companies go bankrupt, get acquired, or simply stop writing long-term care policies altogether. And when that happens, guess what happens to your premiums? They don't get refunded. You're just out that money. Penn Treaty was one of the largest long-term care insurers in the country. They went into rehabilitation in 2009, and policyholders are still fighting to get their benefits. CNO Financial, which owned Conseco Senior Health Insurance, stopped paying claims properly for years. Policyholders had to sue to get the benefits they'd paid for. And this brings me to another point that I think is crucial for everyone to understand. The long-term care insurance industry is not a mature industry. It's not like life insurance, which has been around for over a century and has predictable actuarial tables. Long-term care insurance has only been widely available since the 1980s, and the insurance companies are still figuring out how to price these policies. What's happening, and I've seen this with my own eyes, is that insurance companies underprice these policies initially to gain market share. They made assumptions about claim rates, about care costs, about investment returns that turned out to be completely wrong. And now they're trying to make up for those mistakes by jacking up premiums on existing policyholders. I was at a conference last year. This was the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors annual meeting. And I heard a presentation from an actuary who works for one of the major carriers. And this guy admitted on stage that they had underestimated long-term care costs by 40% when they first started writing these policies. 40%. Can you imagine any other industry getting away with that kind of miscalculation? But here's what really gets me. Here's what really makes my blood boil about this whole situation. The way these policies are marketed, the way they're sold to seniors, it's borderline predatory. The marketing materials are full of scary statistics about nursing home costs, about families going bankrupt paying for care. They paint these worst-case scenarios and then present their insurance as the only solution. I remember seeing a mailer that was sent to one of my clients. The headline was something like, "Will you be the 1 in 3 who goes broke paying for long-term care?" And then it went on to describe how a typical nursing home stay costs $108,000 per year, how that cost is increasing by 4% annually, how Medicare doesn't cover long-term care, how Medicaid requires you to spend down all your assets first. All of that is technically true, by the way. But it's misleading. It's misleading because it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't mention that most people don't need years and years of nursing home care. It doesn't mention alternatives like in-home care, which is much less expensive. It doesn't mention that many people can modify their homes to age in place safely and comfortably. And it certainly doesn't mention the most important alternative of all, self-insurance. Setting aside money specifically for potential long-term care costs and investing it conservatively, so it's there when and if you need it. Now, I'm not saying long-term care insurance is never appropriate. I'm not saying that at all. There are situations where it makes sense. If you have a family history of Alzheimer's or dementia, if you have chronic health conditions that make long-term care more likely, if you have significant assets that you want to protect for your heirs, in those cases, long-term care insurance might be worth considering. But for most people, for most middle-class retirees with modest savings, long-term care insurance is not the answer. It's not the solution it's marketed as being. In fact, in many cases, it's making their financial situation worse, not better. Let me give you another example. I had a client, let's call her Dorothy from Minneapolis. She bought a long-term care policy when she was 55 years old. 55! The premiums started at $2,400 per year, which seemed manageable at the time. But Dorothy is now 71, and that premium has increased to $4,800 per year. She's paid over $52,000 in premiums over the past 16 years. Dorothy called me last month in tears. In tears. The insurance company had sent her a notice that her premium was going up to $6,200 next year, and she simply can't afford it. She's living on Social Security and a small pension, and she's already struggling to pay her bills. So what are her options? She can drop the policy and lose every penny she's paid in over 16 years. She can reduce her benefits to keep the premium lower, which defeats the whole purpose of having the insurance in the first place. Or she can somehow find the money to pay the higher premium, which would mean cutting back on other necessities. Dorothy is trapped. She's absolutely trapped by a financial product that was supposed to give her peace of mind and security. Instead, it's become a source of stress and financial strain that's making her retirement years miserable. And Dorothy's situation is not unique. It's not uncommon at all. I get calls like this regularly from people who bought long-term care insurance 10, 15, 20 years ago and are now facing premium increases they can't afford. You know what I tell these people? I tell them what I wish someone had told them years ago. I tell them to run the numbers, to really look at what they've paid versus what they're likely to get back, to consider their alternatives. For example, if Dorothy had invested that $52,000 over the past 16 years instead of paying insurance premiums, and if she'd earned just 4% annually on those investments, she'd have over $70,000 right now. $70,000 that would be hers, that she could use for long-term care if needed, or for anything else if she doesn't need care. But Dorothy doesn't have $70,000. She has an insurance policy with benefits that she may never need, premiums that she can't afford, and no liquid assets to show for 16 years of payments. This is what I mean when I say this purchase can drain your nest egg overnight. It's not always overnight in the literal sense, but it can drain your resources steadily, relentlessly, until one day you wake up and realize you've paid tens of thousands of dollars for something that's not there when you need it. Now, I want to talk about something else that's related to this. Something that I think is equally important for people to understand. And that's the psychology behind why people buy long-term care insurance in the first place. It's fear. It's pure, unadulterated fear. Fear of being a burden on their children, fear of losing their independence, fear of spending their final years in a nursing home, fear of leaving their spouse impoverished. These are all legitimate fears, by the way. These are real concerns that every aging person should think about. But here's the problem. And this is something I learned from my mentor, Dr. Daniel Kahneman, when I had the privilege of working with him on some behavioral finance research back in the 90s. Fear makes us make irrational financial decisions. Fear makes us overestimate risks and underestimate our own ability to handle those risks. The insurance industry knows this. They absolutely know this, and they exploit it. They use fear-based marketing to sell products that often don't deliver the protection they promise. I remember sitting in on a sales presentation for long-term care insurance about 5 years ago. The salesman, and I won't name the company, but it's one of the big ones. This salesman spent 45 minutes showing horror stories, pictures of people in nursing homes, statistics about families going bankrupt, testimonials from adult children who had to quit their jobs to care for parents. And then, right at the end, he presented his insurance product as the solution to all these problems. No mention of premium increases. No discussion of elimination periods or benefit limitations. No comparison to alternative strategies. Just fear, followed by his product as the antidote to that fear. That's not financial planning, folks. That's not helping people make informed decisions about their retirement security. That's manipulation, pure and simple. Real financial planning involves looking at all the options, all the risks, all the potential outcomes. It involves running scenarios, doing calculations, considering personal circumstances and family situations. It involves acknowledging that there's no perfect solution, but helping people find the approach that makes the most sense for their specific situation. And for most people, when you do that kind of comprehensive analysis, self-insurance comes out ahead of purchasing long-term care insurance. Let me walk you through the math on this, because I think it's important for everyone to see the numbers for themselves. Let's say you're 60 years old and you're considering long-term care insurance. A typical policy might cost you $4,000 per year and provide $200,000 in benefits. Over the next 20 years, assuming no premium increases, which is a big assumption, you'd pay $80,000 in premiums. Now, What if instead of buying insurance, you put that $4,000 per year into a conservative investment account earning 5% annually? After 20 years, you'd have approximately $132,000. That's $52,000 more than you paid in premiums, and it's money that belongs to you regardless of whether you ever need long-term care. But let's say you do need care. Let's say you need $150,000 worth of care over 3 years. With the insurance policy, you'd get your $150,000 in benefits, assuming the insurance company pays promptly and doesn't find reasons to deny claims. But you'd have paid $80,000 in premiums, so your net benefit is $70,000. With the self-insurance approach, you'd use $150,000 from your fund to pay for care. But remember, your fund has $132,000 in it, so you'd only need to come up with an additional $18,000 from other sources. And if you continued saving beyond the initial 20 years, your fund would be even larger. Plus, and this is crucial, with self-insurance, you have flexibility. You can use the money for in-home care, adult daycare, home modifications, assisted living, nursing home care, whatever works best for your situation. You're not limited to the specific types of care that the insurance company will pay for. And if you never need long-term care, with insurance, you've lost all those premium payments. With self-insurance, you have a nice chunk of money that you can leave to your heirs, use for travel, donate to charity, whatever you want. The math is clear, the flexibility is clear. So why don't more financial advisors recommend self-insurance over long-term care insurance? Well, I'll tell you why, and this might surprise some of you. It's because advisors make money selling insurance. They get commissions, sometimes very substantial commissions, for selling long-term care insurance policies. They don't make any money if you decide to self-insure by putting money into a savings account or conservative investments. I'm not saying all advisors are motivated purely by commissions. Most of the advisors I know are good people who genuinely want to help their clients. But the incentive structure in our industry pushes advisors toward product sales rather than comprehensive planning. When I first started in this business, I sold insurance too. I sold lots of it. Life insurance, annuities, long-term care insurance. If it paid a commission, I sold it. And I justified it by telling myself that people needed these products, that I was providing valuable protection. But over the years, as I saw more and more clients struggle with premium increases, claim denials, and policies that didn't deliver what was promised, I started to question whether I was really acting in my clients' best interests. The turning point for me was when I started managing my own money the way I was advising my clients to manage theirs. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that the strategies I was recommending to my clients weren't the strategies I was using for my own financial planning. For my own long-term care planning, I was self-insuring. I was setting aside money in a dedicated account, investing it conservatively, and planning to use it for care if needed. I wasn't buying long-term care insurance for myself or my family, and that's when I realized I had to change my approach. I had to start giving my clients the same advice I was following myself. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, that's easy for him to say. He probably has millions of dollars. He can afford to self-insure. And you're partially right. I have been fortunate in my career, and I do have significant assets. But the principles of self-insurance work regardless of your wealth level. Whether you can afford to set aside $2,000 per year or $20,000 per year, the math still works in your favor compared to purchasing insurance. Let me give you an example with smaller numbers. Let's say you can only afford to set aside $1,500 per year for potential long-term care costs. That's $120 per month. Over 15 years at a 4% return, you'd have about $30,000 saved. Now, $30,000 isn't enough to cover the full cost of nursing home care for several years, but it's enough to pay for in-home care for a significant period, or to supplement other resources like family support or government programs. And here's the key point. It's $30,000 that belongs to you. It's liquid, it's accessible, and you can use it however you need to. Compare that to a long-term care insurance policy with a $1,500 annual premium, which might provide $100,000 in benefits that you may never use, with restrictions on how those benefits can be used. The insurance industry will tell you that $30,000 isn't enough, that you need the full protection of insurance, but they won't tell you that most people can get by with less than full nursing home care, especially if they plan ahead and make smart choices about where and how they receive care. For instance, in-home care costs about half what nursing home care costs. Assisted living costs about 2/3 what nursing home care costs. Adult daycare programs can provide social interaction and supervision during the day, while allowing people to continue living at home. There are also programs like the Veterans Administration's Aid and Attendance Benefit, which can provide up to $2,100 per month for qualifying veterans and their spouses who need help with activities of daily living. There are state programs that help people modify their homes to make them safer and more accessible. There are community programs that provide meals, transportation, and social services for seniors. But you won't hear about these alternatives from insurance salespeople, because these alternatives reduce the perceived need for their products. I want to tell you about one more client, because I think this story illustrates perfectly why the self-insurance approach is superior for most people. This client, let me call him Frank. Frank was a retired postal worker from Ohio. He'd saved diligently throughout his career and had about $400,000 in retirement savings when he came to see me. Frank was 68 years old, in good health, but worried about long-term care costs because his father had spent 3 years in a nursing home before passing away. Frank had been approached by an insurance salesman who wanted to sell him a long-term care policy with a $4,500 annual premium. The policy would provide $150,000 in benefits, which the salesman claimed would be enough to cover 2 years of nursing home care. But when Frank and I sat down and really looked at his situation, we discovered some interesting things. First, Frank owned his home free and clear, and it was worth about $180,000. Second, Frank was very attached to his community and had no interest in moving to a retirement community or nursing home unless absolutely necessary. Third, Frank had a daughter who lived nearby and was willing to help coordinate care if needed. So instead of buying insurance, Frank and I developed a different plan. We set up a separate investment account specifically for potential long-term care costs. Frank committed to putting $4,500 per year into this account, the same amount he would have paid in insurance premiums. We also looked into modifying Frank's home to make it safer and more accessible as he aged. We budgeted $15,000 for things like grab bars, ramps, a walk-in shower, and better lighting. This money came from his existing savings, not from his long-term care fund. Frank's plan was to age in place as long as possible, using his long-term care fund to pay for in-home services if needed. If he eventually needed more intensive care, he could use his home equity as a backup resource, either by selling the house or taking out a reverse mortgage. That was 8 years ago. Today, Frank is 76 and still living independently in his own home. His long-term care fund has grown to over $55,000. He's needed some minor in-home help, someone to help with yard work and house cleaning, which he pays for from his regular budget, not from his long-term care fund. Frank tells me regularly how glad he is that he didn't buy the insurance. He's seen friends struggle with premium increases and claim denials. He's watched the insurance company that would have sold him the policy get acquired by another company with all the uncertainty that entails. Meanwhile, Frank has peace of mind, knowing that his money is there, growing, available when and if he needs it. And if he never needs long-term care, his daughter will inherit that money, along with everything else. That's the power of self-insurance, folks. It's flexibility, it's control, it's financial security, without the uncertainty and restrictions that come with insurance products. Now, I want to address one more argument that the insurance industry makes, and that's the argument about protecting assets for your heirs. The industry claims that long-term care insurance allows you to preserve your legacy by paying for care with insurance benefits rather than depleting your own assets. This sounds good in theory, but in practice, it doesn't work out the way it's presented. First of all, most people don't have huge estates to protect. The median retirement savings for Americans aged 65-74 is about $164,000. For people with that level of assets, paying insurance premiums for decades reduces their legacy more than self-insuring would. Second, the insurance only protects assets if you actually use the benefits. If you pay premiums for 20 years and then die without needing long-term care, you've reduced your legacy by the full amount of the premiums you paid. Third, even if you do use the insurance benefits, you've still paid years of premiums that reduced your legacy along the way. The math just doesn't work out in favor of insurance for most people, even when you consider legacy planning. I had a client couple, let me call them Bill and Mary, who were very concerned about leaving money to their grandchildren. They were considering a long-term care policy that would cost them $8,000 per year combined, with the idea that this would protect their $600,000 in savings for their heirs. But when we ran the numbers, we found that if they self-insured instead, putting that $8,000 per year into conservative investments, they'd likely leave more to their grandchildren even if one of them needed expensive long-term care. Here's why. Over 20 years, their $8,000 annual contributions would grow to about $245,000, assuming a 4% return. Even if they spent $150,000 of that on long-term care, they'd still have $95,000 left from their self-insurance fund. Plus, they'd have preserved their original $600,000 in retirement savings. With the insurance approach, they'd have paid $160,000 in premiums over 20 years, reducing their legacy by that amount. Even if the insurance paid out $150,000 in benefits, their net position would be worse than with self-insurance. And that's assuming the insurance pays out as promised, which is not guaranteed given the financial problems many long-term care insurers are experiencing. The bottom line is this: for most people, self-insurance is superior to purchasing long-term care insurance in almost every scenario. It provides more flexibility, more control, better returns, and less risk. But the insurance industry doesn't want you to know this. They don't want you to run the numbers. They don't want you to consider alternatives. They don't want you to think too hard about whether their products actually deliver the value they promise. And unfortunately, too many financial advisors are either unaware of these facts or unwilling to share them because it would hurt their product sales. So what should you do? What should you do if you're approaching retirement and worried about long-term care costs? First, forget everything the insurance industry has told you about long-term care. Start fresh. Look at the actual statistics, not the scary marketing materials. Understand that most people don't need years of nursing home care. Understand that there are alternatives to nursing homes that cost much less. Second, run the numbers for your own situation. Compare the cost of insurance premiums over time to what you could accumulate by investing that money instead. Be realistic about your life expectancy, your health prospects, and your family situation. Third, consider all your resources, not just your retirement savings. Your home equity, your Social Security benefits, potential family support, community resources, all of these should be part of your long-term care planning. Fourth, if you decide to self-insure, set up a dedicated account for long-term care costs. Don't just assume you'll find the money somewhere if you need care. Make it a specific part of your financial plan. Fifth, invest in prevention and home modifications now, while you're healthy. Staying healthy and safe in your own home for as long as possible is the best long-term care strategy there is. And finally, be skeptical of anyone who tries to sell you long-term care insurance without first doing a comprehensive analysis of your alternatives. Anyone who leads with fear-based marketing rather than objective analysis is not acting in your best interests. You know, folks, I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen a lot of financial products come and go. I've seen a lot of promises made and broken. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the simplest strategies are usually the best strategies. Self-insurance for long-term care is simple. Save money. Invest it conservatively. Use it when and if you need it. It's not sexy. It doesn't generate commissions for salespeople. It doesn't make for compelling marketing brochures. But it works. It works better than insurance for most people in most situations. And it gives you something that insurance can never give you: complete control over your money and your choices. So the next time someone tries to sell you long-term care insurance, remember Margaret, remember Dorothy, remember all the people who thought they were protecting their nest egg but ended up draining it instead. Ask questions, run the numbers, consider your alternatives, and don't let fear drive your financial decisions. Your retirement security is too important for that. Thank you.